My name is John Sylvester. I'm Australia's longest-serving crime reporter and write a weekly column for The Age. Many of my colleagues have wondered why I've never bothered to move to other areas of the paper. The reason's pretty simple. I've got the best job in journalism, playing cops and robbers and getting paid for it. Over more than 40 years I've covered some of Australia's biggest crimes and met fascinating characters on both sides of the law. In this series, you'll hear from them, the cops and the crooks, telling their stories. Welcome to my world. Welcome to Naked City. Back in the 1950s, the police force was conservative, filled with white men over average height, invariably born in Australia or Britain. One of the few who broke the mould was Nick Cecil, the son of a Greek fish and chip shop owner. How he became Victoria's first undercover police agent and became part of a special duties task force that smashed a $500 million organised crime network that employed 10,000 people is one of Australia's best and little-known crime stories. It's a story I know very well because my father, Fred, was part of that task force, known as the Special Duties Gaming Branch. Back then, as now, gambling was hugely popular, but you could only bet on the horses, on the track, at the racecourse. So every Saturday there were tens of thousands of people who wanted to bet who couldn't do it legally, which is why they turned to illegal bookmakers who were known as SPs, because they paid what was known as the starting price. In the 1950s, the illegal SP bookmaking networks were paying off police in every station in Victoria. It was later established that 60% of all police were on the take. There was a keen young uniformed policeman stationed at Richmond who would pinch SP bookmakers whenever he was let out of the station on race day. His name was Mick Miller, and he would become Victoria's best ever Chief Commissioner. Most Saturdays Mick was confined to the station, but every now and again he was rostered to work on the road. That's when he would pinch the SPs. Eventually a detective told him, "They only let you out to pinch them when they want to drive up the price of protection money." The big SP networks had their own people within the Postmaster General's department. The Postmaster General's office were responsible for post and telephones, which enabled them to get big batteries of phones so that people could ring in and place their bets. One Saturday, a senior constable was polishing the floor at Wangaratta Police Station when the phone rang. It was a woman who said, "I want 10 bob on number 3, race 5. The young policeman inquired what number she'd rung and she said Wangaratta 19. The police station was Wangaratta 91. The young copper said, "You've rung the wrong number," and hung up. Sitting there was the phone book, which was only a few pages long. So he flicked through, found the number, and the next Saturday went round and knocked them off for SP bookmaking. In 1955, the new Commissioner, Major General Selwyn Porter, wanted young cops who hadn't been corrupted to man the Special Duties Gaming Squad. Mick Miller was selected to run it. The Wangaratta cop was also selected. He was my father, Fred. Mick Miller's team had immediate success, knocking off certain SP bookmakers. But they had real trouble in trying to infiltrate the ethnic clubs. That's where Nick Cecil came in. Nick Cecil's near enough 90 now, lives with his wife down in a Bayside suburb in their lovely unit. It was a pleasure to wander down there and reflect over those days with a cup of coffee. Nick, how are you?
Yeah, mate.
Yeah, good. Beautiful lemons.
You want to take some home?
Oh, you got a couple that
Sure, yeah.
Robin, how are you? Before joining the police force, Nick worked with General Motors, driving some of the early Holdens at 90 miles an hour around the Dandenongs with a sack of sand in the back. So why'd you join policing?
I wanted to be a policeman. I actually did an apprenticeship with motor mechanic.
Yeah.
And I was one of the first to build the first Holden.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right.
And I was in charge of the final assembly. And I've got a photo of it there. And later became a test driver with her. And we used to test drive them up there in Dandenongs.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, we used to do 90 mile an hour, Narrabri to Dandenong, with 4 bags of sand in the back of them.
Well, that's why you became a policeman, so you could drive a car pretty fast. So you're at the, it wasn't the academy then, it was the depot, I take it? Yeah? In those days, police were trained at a St Kilda Road depot, not the big police academy of today. Mick Miller had not met Nick Cecil until that day he went out to the depot. And tell me, is it right that Mick Miller went out and gave a lecture about illegal gambling?
Yeah, he visited the depot and gave a lecture on gambling.
While the squad had success at smashing their way into the fortified headquarters of the SP bookmakers, they were struggling to infiltrate the big ethnic clubs that ran huge gaming dens.
So he said he mentioned about having difficulty in some of these clubs.
Following the talk, the brash and bright Nick Cecil stepped forward and said, "I can get in."
And that's when I said to him, well, I reckon I could make it. And a couple of weeks later, after I finished the depot, he came home to my place and asked me would I be interested in doing some undercover work.
So in 1957, Cecil was seconded to Miller's squad to become Australia's first undercover detective. You work with my old man Fred?
Yep.
And Mick, of course.
Yep.
And tell me, they used you in an undercover role particularly, didn't they?
Yes.
So they put you into the clubs as what, a patron or? As Nick's wife Robin gives me coffee, Nick recalls how he gets into the clubs, sneaking in with a friend who was a gambler.
I met one of the guys that I knew who was a gambler.
Yeah.
And I cottoned on to him and we went around the clubs together and got into them, especially the one that was very difficult, the one, the Cypress Club.
Cecil was sent to the baccarat card games played at the clubs, posing as a punter, mingling with notorious gangsters such as Normie Bradshaw. One of the big gangsters of the day was Normie Bradshaw.
There was Bradshaw, there was Twist.
Yeah, Jack Twist.
Yep, he visited the clubs too.
Normie Bradshaw and Freddie Harrison were the sort of glamour gangsters of the 50s. They used to wear lovely suits and fedora hats, like to go and watch gangster movies. Jack Twist was a hard man. Back in 1958, Freddie Harrison was uncoupling the trailer from his Ford Custom line down at the docks when someone came up and said, "This is yours, Freddie," and shot him in the head. There were 30 men there, but every one of them told police they didn't see anything. 12 made statements they were in the toilet. It was a two-man toilet. The coroner threatened to have the toilet reconstructed in court to see how they all managed to fit in. The star suspect for the murder was Jack Twist. He was never charged and died many years later of natural causes.
As a matter of fact, we did a raid on Bradshaw's house one day.
Yeah.
And I went to go to the back door and he said, "I've got a dog out there." He said, "If you shoot it, I'll shoot you." Because about 2 weeks earlier, a gaming raid by the Carlton police involved the dog and they shot it.
Mm.
So I just cocked the gun and said to Bradshaw, I said, "Do you want to tie up your dog? Because I'm going to go out there." He said, "Fair enough." And he went out and tied his dog.
Well, Normie Bradshaw, he had a fairly interesting demise because he was flying his plane loop-de-loop out here on the bay.
He was killed in the plane.
Yeah. Some people reckon somebody had fiddled with the carburettor.
Yeah, that's right.
So that when he went upside down, bang. Mick's team was called the Incorruptibles. My old man Fred was offered £10,000 a year to protect the top 10 SP bookmakers in Victoria, which is the equivalent these days of around $850,000. Those bookies were caught and driven out of business. Although there was one that got away. He set up interstate and was called Tweety Pie because he was the one that Sylvester, the cat, couldn't catch. The Special Duties team was filled with young idealists, not constrained by the failures of the past. Faced with a problem, invariably one would find an imaginative solution. Obviously, I'm pretty fond of the stories because my old man was involved, but there's some pretty hair-raising raids and some pretty interesting innovations because there was a group that would set the prices and then they'd ring all the different SPs around the state and say, "These are the odds."
That's right.
When they wanted to trace a network of bookies who received their daily odds by telephone from a Flinders Street pricing agency, Nick took the counting device that had been seized from a pinball machine and connected it to a solenoid in a telephone. So when it was clipped to the phone wire, it recorded the numbers as dialed.
You go and sort of answer a phone when the prices rang in, they'd hang up because they had a code, right? So I designed this little box. I got an old telephone which had the solenoid in it, and the pinball machines we'd seized had a meter in which checked how much money went into them. So we tried this contraption where when connected to the phone, the solenoid worked with each dial, and it also relayed the numbers onto the meter. So if they dialed, say, 3, the meter come up 3. Then the next number would be have to say it was 7. You added that onto the 3. So
it'd be 10.
Yep.
Yep.
So we managed to get the numbers.
With this innovative device, Nick and Fred clambered onto the roof of the Flinders Street pricing agent and drilled a hole in a sink exhaust pipe to tap the phone line.
So your dad and I went up at night times, climbed up the scaffolding into the building next door. But while we were crossing over, your dad fell down. Lucky there was about, I suppose he fell down 1.5 meters. But what saved him was there was a ledge. Otherwise he would have gone straight down.
Jesus.
So we got into the building through the roof, and the meter box, the telephone connection box, was beside a pipe which went up to the roof. So we drilled a hole right next to the meter box and connected the wire up to the roof where it came out, connected our box to it.
That Saturday, the two sat on the roof and collated the numbers as they rang.
With this contraption, Saturday morning, they started getting the prices out. Of course, they go beep, 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 and we're writing them down. As we wrote them down, we threw them over the parapet there to waiting car.
Once they had the phone numbers, they put them in a capsule and threw them down to waiting police.
And they transferred the numbers and checked them in the book, passed them on to our other cars.
A security officer at the Postmaster General's then took the numbers and returned with the matching addresses.
I'm pretty sure we got about 20 to 50, it's hard to remember now, but quite a few bookmakers.
More than 30 SPs were pinched the next Saturday. When the Incorruptibles wanted to move on country SPs, they knew the Bush Telegraph would warn their targets long before they gathered the evidence. This is where Nick's other great skill became invaluable.
And then I bumped into Ray Poulter, who was a ex-Richmond footballer. He was coaching Castlemaine. And he said, he knew I was a singer. He said, what about having a barbecue on Friday night? He said, what about coming and doing a show for me?
Because you were part of a band at one point, weren't you? What was the name of the band?
The Harmony Buckaroos.
The Harmony Buckaroos.
Harmony Buckaroos, yeah.
An accomplished singer and guitarist from the band the Harmony Buckaroos, he travelled to Castlemaine as a troubadour, or what we would call today a busker.
So you sort of sat in the pub pretending to be like a busker?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a bad gambler.
Okay, so you were putting bets on yourself?
Yes.
But you'd be playing the guitar while watching who the SPs were and everything else, yeah?
Yeah.
And what was your signature song?
Well, the signature song up there actually was a white sports coat.
A white sport coat and a pink carnation. I'm all dressed up for the dance. A white
Pub crowds loved him, not knowing that while he was singing, he was also identifying the bookies working in the bars. His set included the Platters classic, The Great Pretender.
Oh, yes, I'm the great pretender. Pretending that I'm doing well.
So your encore was to sing The Great Pretender, but tell me, didn't you change the words a bit?
Yes. In the end, where it says, I'm wearing my heart like a clown, I changed it to, I'm wearing a hat with a crown.
The song went, yes, I'm the Great Pretender. just laughing and gay like a clown.
I
seem to be what I'm not, you see.
You see, I'm wearing my heart like
I'm wearing my heart like a crown.
pretending that you're
In his version, he changed the last line to, I'm wearing that hat with a crown. A hint that he was actually a policeman because the policeman's hat had a crown on the badge. It was his form of a private joke. The Special Duties Gaming Squad made it up as they went along. At one stage, for example, there was an SP centre at the top end of town near Spring Street. It was so busy it would be impossible for police to carry out surveillance without being seen. So, deciding to hide in plain sight, one dressed in his best suit and stood out the front, holding a bunch of flowers. He kept looking at his watch and just standing there. What he was doing, he looked like he was a fellow waiting for a date. He waited and waited and waited, looking more and more forlorn, all the time collating who was going in and out of the other building. Eventually, he threw the flowers in the bin and wandered off. For everybody else, it looked like he'd been stood up. It was in the days before Tinder. On one occasion, there was a stronghold just near Russell Street. Nick and Fred went down and grabbed the tobacconist at the front, took him in on a bogus questionnaire, knocked off his keys, had another set cut and were able to sneak in.
You remember there was a tobacconist downstairs?
I decided to get the keys to that place. I told him he had to go up to Russell Street. So we got to Russell Street, we got him to empty his pockets. While I'm questioning him, I got somebody else to go down to the key shop, get a set of keys to cut. So the keys were cut. And of course the next day, your dad and a couple of others got in there, got up into the ceiling, bored a hole in the roof.
Sometimes they would hide in the ceiling and drill a peephole so they could see what was going on, eventually jumping down to make the arrests. It didn't always work though. One lookout once told me he saw my old man creeping up a lane and he yelled out, "What are you doing, Fred?" And he responded, "Wasting my time, apparently." As word spread of how Miller's men could get into anywhere, the SP bookmakers started to fortify their offices more and more. Each time, Miller's men managed to get in. I remember giving a speech at a restaurant up at Lygon Street, and the owner took me out the back and showed me a fortified door about 3 times as thick as a normal one. I said, "Yes, so what?" He said, "We built this to keep your old man out." I said, "Did it work?" He said, "No." It wasn't only Nick Cecil who worked undercover.
I think Mick's team sort of really started a lot of the undercover work because one of them was a pretty good footballer.
One of the members was an accomplished footballer.
Where'd he go?
To Mildura. And he was a good footballer.
So he went up country, becoming their star, all the time working out who were the SP bookmakers in the town.
He's probably one of the best footballers they had up there.
In one weekend, the town lost its best footballer and most of their SPs. If you're enjoying this podcast, please remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And remember to rate and comment on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Unless, of course, you don't like it, then shut up. Nick Cecil was then seconded to the homicide squad to work on ethnic murders, building up an impressive network of informers. One was a Greek man who wouldn't talk to other police. When asked why, he said, "Nick, you're Greek. I want to see you kick on." While he wasn't actually vilified in the police force, the sporting field was different. He played for an Australian rules side which was manned by Greek players.
So it was basically Greek blokes playing footy.
Yeah. As I said, we had a football team. Two of our footballers played with your team, Hawthorn.
Yeah.
The Caddis brothers.
I know them well.
2 played with Hawthorn. Caris played with South Melbourne. Georgie Cogan played with North Melbourne.
He and his teammates were often called Dagos. Dagos was a derogatory term used back in those days to refer to people of Italian or Greek descent.
Any racism? Did anyone...
It was racist. I think I mentioned the word Dago, you know, which used to, I got that when I was a kid at school.
Nick and his teammates hated it.
You would have been sledged, they would have made your
On the
opponents...
footy field, they used it all the time.
Yeah.
But it spurred us on.
Yeah, so...
It did spur us on.
So how did you get them back?
Well, as I said, we beat them, we won the grand final.
Yeah.
And one of the teams, Melbourne, were the ones we always fought against on the field. But they invited, after the grand final, they invited us to their dance. And as I said, they took over, they really made friends of us, and we made friends with their friends and their girls, and became very friendly. We got in the game, won the fights, and the girls.
Nick and his mates had the last laugh. He says, it took us 5 years to win the premiership. We won the footy, we won the fights, and we won the girls. Not a bad trifecta.
Well, you got all three. That's all right. Later on, of course, I remember you were in the intelligence, probably because of the undercover staff, and I reckon you were probably Victoria's first undercover officer.
Cecil earned a reputation as a free-thinking innovator and was placed in charge of the Crime Intelligence Bureau, a secret unit that gathered information on Victoria's most dangerous gangsters.
So you go into Intel, and of course one of your big cases is trying to find the great bookie robber.
Biggs.
Yeah, Ronald Biggs.
That was the sliders.
In 1969, they were tasked to find British Great Train robber Ronald Biggs.
Ronnie Biggs helped pull off the crime of the century, part of a gang that ambushed an overnight mail train, stealing $5 million. He was sentenced to 30 years, but after 15 months escaped from a London prison, then fled to Australia. With his wife Charmian and 2 young boys, Biggs lived at this house in Blackburn North.
Biggs had skipped from his Blackburn North house, where he'd been living with his family. The plan was simple. Follow his wife Charmian and she would eventually lead them to him. It was pointless to skulk around because she knew police were on her tail. So they used a tactic called open surveillance, hoping Biggs would eventually want to see his wife and children.
So, Charmaine?
Charmaine.
Yeah, so you were following her with the aim of trying to find Ronald?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because she'd say to us, look, I know you're following me, where do you want to go today? What sort? Because I'll make it easy for you. So we said, I'll go to the beach anywhere, like that, you know. And we came through to the kids, like there was Nicky, there was Brent, and little Farley.
Nick says they were fantastic kids, and we'd played cricket with them on the streets while we were surveilling them. I even took them home to play with my own kids, he says.
They were wonderful kids. They used to come out while we were watching. The car was parked outside their houses, or up the street a bit. They'd come out and we'd play football and cricket in there. When we used to sit out there and I was going to change the shift, go off for 3 or 4 hours, I'd take their kids home to my place to play with my kids, you know, because I had nobody else. And after 2 or 3 hours, I'd take them back, and they appreciated it. I felt sorry for them because they're getting bullied at school, and I said to our boys, we're going to go and see this school and find out who these kids are, you know. So we found out who it was, and we went up to his parents and told him what he was doing. And the bullying stopped.
Oh, that's great stuff. When did you know that you were not going to get Ronald?
No one at the time was sure how Charmaine kept slipping the net to meet up with her husband. But one day she said, Nick, believe me, he's gone. He's left Australia.
What happened was, she said, come out and said to us, he's gone.
Yeah, that's Charmaine.
Charmaine said, he's gone. And I said, oh yeah, how'd he go? She said, you picked up a car the other day, and this is what hurt me, and he was in the boot. I said, yeah, we pulled up the car, and it was her solicitor. And nobody else in the car. And he'd gone. The car gone. Later on, when she told me he's left Australia, she said he's in the boot. I could have killed myself. I thought, oh no, here he's in the boot.
Biggs just got away. After hiding for months, Biggs sailed to Panama and then moved to Brazil, starting a new life. Charmian and Biggs divorced in 1974.
With the cops closing in, he fled to Brazil. Biggs lived the high life in Rio, fathering a child to a Brazilian woman.
Ronald Biggs was the world's biggest fugitive. Great Train Robbery is stuff of legends. He had plastic surgery and came to Australia masquerading as a tradesman.
They say best men are moulded out of faults and for the most become much more the better for being a little bad. I think that suits me to a T.
In those few last years of the 1950s, the Special Duties Gaming Branch defined task force policing.
Sounds like you've had a fantastic police career. I don't think people understand what it was like back in the 50s because I know that Mick and you and my old man Fred made it up as they were going along. Some of the undercover tactics that I know that you developed were just freaking brilliant because there was no manuscript, there was no book on how to do it.
It was great fun, and I said to Mick when we saw him, I reckon they were the greatest days of the police force, working with your dad.
It's where my old man and Nick and you and the others became long-term friends, and you and I went out to see Mick not that long ago, just before he passed away. It must have been good for you to catch up with him.
I was glad I was able to see him before he passed away because, as I said, I had this vertigo, I could get to the funeral.
Yeah.
When you got in touch with me about the eulogy, I got onto it and it was fantastic, you know.
Well, he said to me, he asked me to speak at his funeral, but the person looking after him at one point said, look, the truth is, the original people he wanted were either dead or senile. So I said, you better tell Mick to hurry up because I think I'm going the same way. So in the end, it was a great funeral. And I mean, he was 92, I think. And he just said, I want you to celebrate my life. I've been incredibly lucky. But he was the best police officer I ever saw.
Mick Miller died in 2019, a giant in policing. It was a huge funeral at the Police Academy. Years earlier, Mick asked if I'd speak at it.
Being in the media, you get to meet some really interesting and newsworthy people. The trouble is most of them are pretty ordinary. But with Mick, the closer you got, the bigger he was. And you saw these great characteristics. Chief Commissioner Ashton went through a great list of achievements, but I'm interested in why. Why did he achieve? Now we know he had a great intellect, moral compass, the work ethic of a Yorkshire pit pony. We know all that. There's one other thing. He was a modest man, but he was imbued with a great sense of self-belief. He always believed he could, and if he had self-doubt, I never ever saw it. Just think for a moment that he's just a senior constable at Richmond. When the Chief Commissioner of the day says, we want you to form a task force, we want you to take on a $500 million industry called the SB bookmaking industry, which had corrupted 60% of the police force. He said, yeah, not a problem, I'll do that. And he selected a few people and off they went. They didn't have phone taps, they didn't have coercive powers. They just had the initiative of using somebody like Nick Cecil, who was an accomplished singer and guitarist, and so they would use him as a troubadour in country pubs. So he'd be playing, but at the same time looking around for the SBs, and they weren't clever enough to know what his signature song meant, which was, yes, I'm the Great Pretender. And Mick himself, he saw a cockatoo outside a gaming place and he said, I thought I know this bloke. So off he went and he got their American car cleaned perfectly, pulled up out the front, pretended to stall and said, mate, can you give me a push? That's where they got the fingerprints off the back. So this sense of belief, of course, wasn't just in policing. After all, he built the family home after getting a book out of the library saying how to build a house. Thank God he didn't get one, how to make a nuclear reactor. I asked him once why he smoked a pipe, and he said because in my early days the crooks used to pop too many cigarettes off me, so he was generous but not stupid.
In policing, I think rank gives you the right to issue instructions. Character gives you the right to be respected. And I notice that in most of the posts and the outpouring of real emotion from ex-members, few referred to him as Chief Commissioner. They preferred the expression boss or the respect of sir. And as I said, when he was delivering the eulogy to Alan Jeans, he turned and he said, "There may have been police as good as you, but none better." Well, I will say I've known many, many great police, but Mick, you were in a league of your own. My father died more than 10 years ago, and a number of old rogues made contact with me to pass on their condolences. They said they always respected him as an honest copper who played by the rules. Mick spoke at my father's funeral. He then asked if I would do a eulogy for him. It was an honour. As a result of the work of Mick Miller's Special Duties Gaming Branch, there were 2 Royal Commissions. One into off-course betting and the second into corruption in the Postmaster General's Department. As a result, they established the TAB. So the next time you have a bet, think of Nick Cecil and the Great Pretender. Nick Cecil lives comfortably with his wife in a unit near the bay, growing lemons as big as your head. After years of fighting, Ronald Biggs returned to the UK to finish his jail sentence and died. Naked City is brought to you by The Age and Sydney Morning Herald. Subscriptions power our newsroom, so to support independent journalism, consider subscribing to the Sydney Morning Herald or The Age. This episode is produced and edited by Anu the Axe Hasbold, Margaret Machine Gun Gordon, and mixed and mastered by Jellic Knight John Greenfield, with technical assistance from Cool Hand Cormac Lally. Tom McHendrick is head of audio. Archival is thanks to 9 and 3AW. I'm John Sylvester. Thanks for listening. This is the last episode of Series 1. I really want to thank people for the feedback. It's been incredibly generous and positive, which has inspired us to do Series 2. Actually, we were always going to do it. It'll start on July 15, and we're going to start with Walsh Street, the terrible crime where 2 police were ambushed.